You know, after spending 67 long years in this world, there's one thing life has taught me above all else. People are almost never what they appear to be at first glance. That's something you only learn through time, and usually the hard way. Every morning, without fail, I wake up about half an hour before the sun begins to rise. It's a habit I picked up decades ago and never managed to break. Even now, when there's no real need to wake up early, my eyes still open before dawn, as if my body remembers all the mornings I had to get moving before the world stirred. Some habits stick with you forever, I guess. My house is nothing grand. Just a quiet, cozy, one-story cottage in Greenbelt, with a small front porch and a garden that used to bloom with roses. Elsa, my wife, planted them herself. It's a simple place, but it holds memories in every corner. We picked this house 30 years ago, back when I was still trying to make a name for myself in the restaurant world. Now, when I stand in front of the mirror each morning, I see a man with a wrinkled face, bushy gray eyebrows, and hair that's almost turned completely white. And just like that, my father's voice echoes in my head. Barton, never let money do the talking. Let your actions speak instead. My father wasn't a man of many words, but when he said something, it stuck with you. He was a truck driver, spent his whole life driving up and down the East Coast, hauling goods from one city to the next. He'd come home carrying the smell of diesel and road dust, with tired eyes but never a single complaint. Even when we had next to nothing, even when bills were piling up, he'd say, "We'll manage." My mother worked hard, too. She sewed clothes for neighbors to help keep us afloat. Our small house in the outskirts of Rockville often buzzed with the rhythmic hum of her sewing machine. The scent of cheap instant coffee lingered in the air, and evenings were filled with my father's tales from the road. Growing up in that house, I made myself a silent promise. One day, I'd build something of my own, a place where people could gather, feel safe, feel at home. I wasn't the top of my class in school, but I had something better: determination. That's what my dad called the real Hutch backbone. College didn't seem like the right path for me. Instead of chasing textbooks and lectures, I chased real-world experience. That's how I ended up working at Jim's Diner, scrubbing pots and peeling potatoes. Jim Kowalski, the owner, was a big man with thick hands, a thick accent, and a heart even bigger than his shoulders. He was a Polish immigrant who taught me something I'll never forget. Food isn't just about feeding people. It's a way to connect, to communicate, to show love. By 25, I had climbed my way up to head chef at a small place in Annapolis. And just 5 years later, I was managing the place. I worked long hours, saved every cent I could, and kept my dream alive. And then Elsa walked into my life. She came in one afternoon to apply for a job as a waitress. She was short, had a sprinkle of freckles across her nose, and her laughter, it sounded like wind chimes on a summer porch. From the moment I saw her, I was done for. "Bart, you take life way too seriously," she used to tease. And just like that, my stress would melt away. We married a year after we met. 2 years later, our son was born. We named him Null. He was born in late December, just a few days before Christmas, and Elsa always believed it was a sign, a little gift from the season of miracles. I still remember how tiny his fingers were when they wrapped around mine for the first time. His eyes? Blue, just like Elsa's. I thought he would take after both of us, her gentle heart, my work ethic. But life had other plans. At 35, I finally opened my first restaurant, a tiny 5-table joint we named the Old Maple. Why that name? Because in the backyard of our first real home, there stood a tall, proud maple tree. Elsa and I would sit beneath its shade every evening, sharing our dreams about the future. That tree meant strength, peace, and hope to us. The name just felt right. In those early years, I was working 18-hour days. I'd come home only to sleep for a few hours before heading back to the kitchen. Elsa took care of everything at home, even bringing Noel to the restaurant sometimes just so he could spend a little time with me. I tried to show him the ropes, how we picked the best ingredients, how we treated every dish like it mattered. I hoped he'd fall in love with it the way I did, but he didn't. He looked bored, restless. I saw a kind of distance in his eyes that worried me. "He's still young, Bart. Give him time," Elsa would say, and I wanted to believe her. As the years passed, the old maple began to find its footing. We moved into a bigger house, and I sent Noel to a private school. I thought I was giving him everything I never had. Maybe that was the mistake. While other kids helped their parents at family shops or learned how to fix tractors on farms, my son spent summers at fancy camps. I wanted to protect him from the hard work that shaped me, but maybe I sheltered him too much. By the time I hit 45, I was running 3 restaurants under the Old Maple name. People were starting to recognize the name. My duck with cherry sauce became a bit of a local legend. And my mother's apple pie? That always brought folks back. Critics liked us. We got awards. But the real win for me was always the feeling that I had created something meaningful. A place where people came to feel special, to feel seen. Noel was finishing high school then. He had grown into a tall, confident young man. Easy smile, easy, charm. Everything seemed to come effortlessly to him. Grades, friends, dates. I tried nudging him toward the family business. Maybe hotel management, culinary school. "Dad, seriously?" he said with a raised eyebrow. "Do I look like someone who wants to sweat in a kitchen all day?" He couldn't have known how much. That stung. His voice dripped with disdain, as if he couldn't understand how anyone would choose the life I had built. I told him, "It's not just a kitchen, Noel. It's a whole business. It gave us everything." I kept my tone calm, but inside I was torn up. "I know, and I'm grateful. But I have other plans," he replied. He ended up choosing marketing and communications. Said it was a better fit for someone like him. Elsa, of course, urged me to let it go. "The most important thing is that he's happy," she said. And once again, I gave in. Maybe I gave in too often. Maybe I should have made him work summers at the restaurant, like I did when I was young. Taught him what $1 was really worth. But I didn't. I wanted his life to be easier than mine. In trying to give him everything, I fear I gave him too little direction. After college, Noel jumped from one job to another. A few months here, a year there, never quite landing, never sticking around long. He tried starting his own business once, but it didn't last. I offered him a role at one of the Old Maple restaurants, but he always had a reason to say no. "I've got my own path, Dad," he'd insist. And in his eyes, I saw a stubbornness that reminded me of someone. My father. By the time I turned 55, I had built a chain of 5 Old Maple restaurants, each doing well. I had the chance to expand further, but I chose not to. I didn't want to lose what made the place special. With the business steady, Elsa and I finally started planning to travel, just the 2 of us. But life had a cruel twist in store. At age 57, I lost Elsa pancreatic cancer. It was already too advanced when they found it. The doctors gave her 6 months. We fought. She fought. But it wasn't enough. Those months aged me more than any decade had. Noel came home on weekends, flying in from Chicago where he was working. But I was mostly alone, watching the woman I loved fade away. "Don't blame him, Bart," she whispered to me one night near the end. "He doesn't know how to face pain, because we never taught him how." And she was right. After she was gone, I buried myself in work. The restaurant became my refuge. I updated the menu with her favorite dishes, added a new wine list, made the lighting softer, the music warmer. The Old Maple was no longer just a restaurant. It became a tribute to her, to us, to everything we had built. A year later, Noel returned to Greenbelt. His latest business idea had failed. He needed money. I didn't ask how much, I just wrote the check. He said he'd repay me, but we both knew he wouldn't. That's when he introduced me to Verity Prescott, his new girlfriend. She was tall, elegant, with jet black hair that looked like it had never seen a bad day. Her nails were always perfectly done. She said she liked cooking, but I would later find out she much preferred eating out. They came over for dinner at my place. I didn't prepare anything fancy, just a simple meal from the heart. Beef stew with vegetables, the kind my mother used to make, warm bread and apple pie for dessert. "Mr. Hutch, what a cozy home you have," Verity said politely, though her eyes told a different story. I noticed how she glanced at Elsa's old chair, the photos in mismatched frames, the bookshelf full of worn novels and mystery paperbacks. She didn't hide her disapproval well. "Thank you, Verity," I replied calmly. My wife and I always valued comfort over ostentatious luxury. She gave a slight grimace at the word ostentatious, but didn't say more. During dinner, she barely touched her food. "I'm on a diet," she explained, dabbing at her lips with a napkin. Null sat quietly the whole time, as if walking on eggshells. "What do you do, Mr. Hutch?" Verity asked me, tilting her head politely. "I'm in the restaurant business," I answered. "Oh, really? What kind? Waiter? Chef?" she asked with a tone that couldn't hide her condescension. Her voice clearly betrayed her superiority. "A little bit of everything?" I smiled without going into details. The habit of not flaunting my achievements was in my blood. "And you?" "I'm a corporate image consultant. I help companies look better in the eyes of their customers and partners," she said, as if she were introducing herself to an important client rather than a future father-in-law. Null looked at her with the adoration that only men who are madly in love can muster. I saw in his eyes the same expression that had once been in mine when I looked at Elsa. But unlike Elsa, who always tried to raise people to her level, Verity seemed to want to emphasize the distance between herself and others. 3 months later, they were married. The wedding was lavish with 200 guests, most of whom I'd never met before. Verity's parents, Hugh and Winterfred Prescott, were just like their daughter, prim with perfect manners and condescending smiles. Hugh owned a real estate company, and Winfred was involved in charity work and served on several community boards. "Barton, I hear you work in a restaurant," Hugh asked during their reception, holding an $80 glass of champagne. "Yes, that's right." I didn't bother to elaborate. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to this reaction and saw no point in disabusing people, especially those who judged a person by the thickness of their wallet. "A respectable job," he nodded with the air of someone who had never done a day's work in his life. Null said, "You've been in the business for a long time." "All my life." I smiled and walked away, feeling his appraising gaze on me. After the wedding, Noel and Verity bought a house in the prestigious Greenbelt neighborhood, a 2-story mansion with a swimming pool and landscape grounds. He never asked where they got the money for such a purchase, but I suspected that Verity's parents had helped out or that they had taken out another loan. Our meetings became rare and strained. Every time I came to their house for dinner, I felt out of place in this realm of modern design and refined elegance. Verity always found a way to point out my simplicity. Whether it was a comment about my clothes, "Oh, Barton, you're always so practical in your choice of wardrobe," or my habits. "You still don't use a smartphone. How cute and old-fashioned." Noel never stood up for me. What's more, I saw him gradually start to adopt his wife's mannerisms, her views, and even her intonations. My son, who once could talk to me for hours about baseball or old movies, now discussed stocks, investments, and real estate. He started working for his father-in-law's company, quickly climbing the corporate ladder thanks to his family connections. I didn't interfere in their lives, although sometimes my heart ached at the thought that Elsa wouldn't recognize our boy in this well-groomed young man with a designer briefcase and a constantly ringing phone. Meanwhile, the old maple continued to thrive. I opened a 6th restaurant in Baltimore, and it quickly became popular with locals and tourists alike. I rarely mentioned my successes in conversations with Noel and Verity, not out of secrecy, but because they never asked. To them, I was just an aging father who was somehow connected to a restaurant, perhaps a manager or a chef, nothing more. Sometimes, I wondered if Noel knew the true scale of my business. After all, he had grown up watching me work and seeing their restaurants develop, but maybe he just didn't think it mattered or was embarrassed by his father's modest business in the face of the real successes in the Prescott world. One evening, while looking through papers in my office above the main restaurant of the Old Maple in Greenbelt, I came across an old photograph. It was of Elsa and me standing on the porch of our first restaurant on opening day. She was holding a bouquet of wildflowers. I had my arm around her shoulders and we were both smiling as if the world were at our feet. "I miss you, El," I whispered, running my finger over her smiling face. "You would have known what to do with Null. You always did." That night, I made a decision I had been putting off for too long. It was time to talk to my son about the future of the Old Maple. I wasn't getting any younger, and although the managers at my restaurants were reliable people, I wanted the business I'd dedicated my life to stay in the family. Maybe Noel didn't want to work in the kitchen or interact with customers, but he could handle the financial side, marketing, brand development, the things that really interested him. With these thoughts in mind, I fell asleep imagining how our next meeting might unfold. I didn't know then that fate had a completely different scenario in store, and that a phrase uttered by my daughter-in-law over dinner would change our relationship forever. Verity Prescott Hutch. Even her name sounds like something out of an advertising brochure. Polished, flawless, and completely fake. Our first meeting took place on that damp October evening when Noel brought her to meet me. I had seen many women he had brought home before, but Verity was different from all of them. There was something predatory about her, a kind of calculation hidden behind her perfect smile in designer clothes. "Dad, this is Verity." Noel introduced her with an expression on his face as if he had brought home a movie star. She held out her hand with long, perfectly manicured nails. Her handshake was light, as if she was afraid of getting my hands dirty. Hands that had worked in the kitchen for 40 years, cutting vegetables, kneading dough, tenderizing meat. "Very nice to meet you, Mr. Hutch. Noel has told me so much about you." Her voice was melodious, but with a slight note of condescension that was impossible to miss. "The feeling is mutual, Verity. I hope not everything Noel told you was true," and I joked, trying to lighten the mood. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, only good things, I assure you." That first evening, I prepared my signature roast, the dish most often ordered at my restaurants. It was a simple but hearty meal prepared with love and attention to detail. Verity barely touched her plate. "Aren't you hungry?" I asked, noticing how she was carefully pushing her plate away. "Oh, no, not at all. I'm just on a diet." "Nothing personal, Mr. Hutch. Your food just looks homey. Homey as if it were something shameful, something to be avoided." I saw Noel shift uncomfortably in his chair, clearly unsure which side to take. "I understand. Next time let me know your preferences, and I'll make something more suitable," I said, swallowing the sarcasm that was rising to my lips. After dinner, we moved into the living room. Verity looked around the room with poorly concealed amazement, as if she couldn't believe that people actually lived in such conditions. "You have a very authentic home, Mr. Hutch," she said, lingering on the old armchair that I refused to replace because Elsa loved to sit in it. "Thank you. It served me well for many years. How long have you lived here?" "Noel mentioned that you work in a restaurant." 30 years. And yes, I've been in the restaurant business my whole life." "How interesting," she said without the slightest interest in her voice. "And what exactly do you do? Are you a chef? A waiter?" I glanced at Noel. He was clearly nervous, tapping his fingers on his knee, a habit he'd had since childhood when he felt uncomfortable. "I do a little bit of everything," I replied evasively, not wanting to go into details. Not because I was ashamed of my work, but because I felt that Verity wouldn't appreciate what I'd built from scratch. Dad's a great cook, Null interjected, trying to change the subject. His roast is the best in the world. Oh, I'm sure it is. Verity smiled her perfect smile. But, these days, home cooking is becoming less popular. People prefer modern restaurants with innovative cuisine, molecular gastronomy, fusion, all that stuff. Maybe, I smiled in response, but I've always believed that real food doesn't need any gimmicks. The most important thing is quality ingredients and a love for what you do. How sweet, she said in a tone that made me feel like a naive child who didn't understand the realities of life. The evening continued in the same vein. Verity talked easily about her job as a corporate image consultant, her trips to Europe, and the celebrities she had met. Null looked at her with admiration, occasionally interjecting comments to show that he too belonged to this glamorous world. When they left, Verity held out her hand to me again, but this time her handshake was even lighter, almost imperceptible. It was very informative. Mr. Touch, thank you for dinner. The door closed behind them and I was left alone in my authentic home, feeling a sense of unease growing inside me. Something about this woman alarmed me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way she looked at Noel, not with love but with satisfaction, as if he were just another acquisition in her collection. 3 months after that meeting, Noel announced that he and Verity were engaged. I tried to look happy, but inside I felt cold. Elsa would have known what to say in a situation like that. She always found the right words. I just patted my son on the shoulder and said, "If you're happy, I'm happy for you." The wedding was lavish and expensive. Verity's parents, Hugh and Wifford Prescott, spared no expense. The ceremony took place in a historic mansion that they had rented especially for the occasion. 200 guests in orchestra champagne. That cost more than my first car. I felt out of place among all these people in designer suits and dresses. "Here comes the father of the groom," exclaimed Hugh Prescott, approaching me with a glass in his hand. All with perfectly coiffed gray hair and a smile that seemed to be the result of hours of practice in front of a mirror. He put his hand on my shoulder with the familiarity of a man accustomed to owning everything he touches. "Barton, right? Pleased to finally meet you in person. Verity has told me so much about you." I doubted that Verity had even remembered me after our meeting, but I nodded politely. "Likewise, Mr. Prescott. Call me Hugh. We're family now." He laughed, revealing perfectly white teeth. "Null said you work in the restaurant business. That must be tough these days." "Yes, but I'm not complaining. Of course. A job is a job, right? The main thing is that it's satisfying." He spoke to me in the tone of a wealthy patron talking to a poor relative who had been lucky enough to find himself at this celebration of life. Wifford Prescott, a petite woman with carefully coiffed raven hair. Now I understood where Verity got it from, and a string of pearls around her neck that probably cost as much as my car joined us. Barton, "Dear, how wonderful to finally meet you. You must be so proud of Null. Such a wonderful young man." "Yes, he's always been special," I replied, thinking how little these people knew my son. To them, he was just a good catch for their daughter, another trophy in the Prescott collection. After the wedding, Noel and Verity moved into a large house in the prestigious Greenbelt neighborhood. I attended their housewarming party, another pompous event with champagne, canapes, and people I had never seen before. The house was huge with high ceilings, marble floors, and a minimalist design that Verity described as the last word in contemporary aesthetics. "What do you think, Barton?" she asked, showing me around the house like a museum curator displaying exhibits. "Impressive," I replied honestly. "But isn't it a bit too big for the two of you?" "Oh, we plan to have children, of course, but not right away. I want to focus on my career first." You know, it's a time when women can have it all, a family and a successful career. I nodded, thinking about how Elsa had juggled caring for Null with working at our first restaurant. She didn't talk about career and success. She just did what she thought was right without fanfare or self-admiration. 2 years have passed since then. 2 years of Null gradually distancing himself from me and everything related to his past life. He started working for Hugh Prescott's company marketing luxury real estate. His shirts were now always perfectly ironed. His hair styled with expensive products, and phrases he had clearly picked up from Verity and her parents crept into his speech. Our meetings became rare and strained. Every time I came to their house, Verity found a way to point out my simplicity. "Barton, you always wear such practical shirts," she would say, glancing at my clothes. "It's so refreshing in this day and age. When everyone is chasing brands, or your car must be very reliable if you've been driving it for so many years. Few people appreciate that kind of stability these days." Every compliment was a veiled insult. Every conversation a demonstration of her superiority. No said nothing. Sometimes I saw a hint of embarrassment in his eyes, but he never stood up for me. Never stopped his wife when she crossed the line. Once, when the three of us were having dinner at their house, Verity decided to ask me about my retirement plans. "Barton, you must be thinking about retiring. Many of my friends are already retired at your age." "I love my job, Verity. I see no reason to quit." "Sure, but being a waiter and a chef is such physically demanding work. You need to take care of yourself." I glanced at Null. He was engrossed in his steak, carefully cutting it into perfect pieces. "I'm fine," I replied curtly. Of course. It's just Null and you're worried. Right, dear?" Null looked up as if he had been suddenly pulled out of a deep sleep. "Huh? Yes, Dad. Maybe you should think about slowing down a little. You're not getting any younger." At that moment, I knew I had lost my son. Not physically. He was sitting right in front of me. But my Null, the boy Elsa and I had raised with love and hope, was gone. In his place was this well-groomed young man, repeating his wife's words as if they were his own. After that dinner, I started visiting them even less often. We talked on the phone sometimes, exchanging formal pleasantries. "How are you, Dad?" "I'm fine, son. How are you?" "Everything's great. A lot of work." Empty words with no real meaning behind them. Verity seemed quite content with the way things were. She politely invited me over for Christmas and Thanksgiving, but I felt she was doing it more out of a sense of duty than a genuine desire to have me aether table. At one of these family dinners, I think it was Thanksgiving, Verity told me about her new project. She was consulting for a chain of high-end restaurants on image issues. You wouldn't believe how many restaurant owners don't understand the basics of presentation and marketing. They think it's enough to just cook. Well, these days that's not enough. I nodded politely, swallowing turkey that was dry and undersalted. For example, the restaurant I'm working with now. 3 Michelin stars, by the way. Their chef is a genius, but he has no idea how to interact with the public. We had to completely rebuild his public image. "Interesting," I said, thinking of the chef at my restaurant in Baltimore, Yeppe, an Italian with golden hands and a fiery temper who refused to come out to greet guests, but cooked so well that people came back again and again to try his dishes. "Yes, it's very interesting work. I help people become better, more successful, or just different," I remarked. Verity gave me a sharp look, but her smile didn't waver. Sometimes people need to change to keep up with the times. Not everyone can afford to stay the same. It was another jab at me, but I was used to them and just smiled in response. After dessert, as we were drinking coffee in the living room, Verity suddenly said, "By the way, Barton, Noel, and I were thinking about having a small dinner party in 2 weeks. It's our wedding anniversary. Nothing fancy, just the closest family and friends. My parents will be there and we wanted to invite you." I was surprised. They usually celebrated such events with their friends who were as young and ambitious as they were. Thank you for the invitation. Of course, I'll bether. Great. We booked a table at the Old Maple. Do you know the place? They say the food is excellent, although a little traditional. I almost choked on my coffee. The Old Maple is my flagship restaurant, in Greenbelt, the one where it all started. Yes, I've heard of it, I replied, trying to keep a neutral expression on my face. One of my clients raved about it. She said they have an excellent sirloin steak with blueberry sauce. I smiled. That dish was my pride and joy, a recipe I had perfected over the years. The blueberry sauce was made according to a special recipe, with red wine, honey, and spices known only to me and the restaurant's head chef. Sounds delicious, I said. I hope you like it. I know you prefer home cooking, but sometimes it's nice to go out somewhere more decent. I didn't tell her that the Old Maple started out as a small family restaurant where I cooked and Elsa waited. Tables. I didn't tell her how we'd scrimped and saved to buy quality kitchen equipment, how I had personally chosen every chair and table, how I had drawn the first menu myself. All these years, I hadn't thought it necessary to brag about my achievements. And now looking at Verity's indulgent smile, I saw no point in starting. I'll be looking forward to it, I said. And it was the honest truth. 2 weeks flew by. I was busy as usual. Running a chain of restaurants required constant attention, especially now that we were preparing to open the 7th Old Maple in Annapolis. I personally checked the menu, talked to suppliers, and supervised the renovations. Work had always been my solace, my way of forgetting about my problems, about the emptiness Elsa had left behind, about my disappointment in my son. The evening before the dinner, I called Jeffrey, the manager of the Old Maple in Greenbelt. I'll be having dinner with your son's family tomorrow, I told him. Oh, Mr. Hutch, we'll be delighted to have you. Would you like me to prepare something special? No, Jeff, everything should be as usual. They don't know I'm the owner. Understood, sir. We'll behave ourselves. Just maybe a table by the window, the one that looks out on the garden. Of course, Mr. Hutch, everything will be done. I didn't sleep a wink that night thinking about the evening ahead. It wasn't that I was planning some grand scene or revelation. It was just that for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange excitement, almost anticipation. It was as if something was about to happen, something important. In the morning, I spent a long time choosing what to wear. My wardrobe wasn't very varied. Mostly practical shirts, jeans, and a few jackets for business meetings. But this time, I took out a suit that I only wore on special occasions. Dark blue with a barely noticeable stripe. Bought when Elsa was still alive. She always said I looked younger in it. Well, El, what do you think? Should I make an impression? I asked the photo of my wife standing on the dresser. She smiled, her usual warm smile from the photograph, and I thought she nodded approvingly. I chose the suit, a white shirt, and a muted burgundy tie, Elsa's favorite color. Not too flashy, but elegant enough, even by Verity standards. In the afternoon, I stopped by the restaurant to make sure everything was ready for the evening. Jeffrey had already arranged for the best table to be prepared, the one by the window overlooking the small garden I had planted behind the restaurant. In autumn, the garden no longer looked as lush as it did in summer, but it was still pleasing to the eye with the bright colors of the maple trees after which the restaurant was named. Everything will be fine, Mr. Hutch, Jeffrey assured me. We'll prepare the best dinner for you. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. I didn't know what to expect from this evening, but I was ready for anything. Back home, I checked my appearance once more and sprayed a little cologne on my wrist. The same one Elsa had given me on our last wedding anniversary, which I had been saving for special occasions. I glanced at my watch. It was time to leave. On the way to the restaurant, I thought about Null, about what he was like as a child, curious, playful, with eyes full of wonder at the world. When and how did he turn into this alienated young man who seemed ashamed of his father? Maybe I'd put too much pressure on him with my expectations. Or on the contrary, had I not guided him enough, allowing him to drift? Elsa always said that Everyone has their own path, and we cannot force others to live by our rules. Let him go, Bart, she would say. Now, just love him for who he is. But is it easy to love someone who seems to have rejected everything you taught him? Who allows his wife to mock you without saying a word in your defense? I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes later than planned. It wasn't that I was deliberately late. I just decided to stop by the cemetery first to put flowers on Elsa's grave. Today was a special day, and I wanted her to be with me, at least in my thoughts. The old maple looked festive on this autumn evening. The facade was softly lit, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. Through the large windows, I could see candles flickering on the tables inside. Waiters in white shirts and dark vests gliding between the tables. My restaurant. My life's work. I left my car in the parking lot, not in the owner's spot. Today I was just a guest. At the last minute, I decided not to wear a suit after all, but to stay in my usual clothes, dark gray pants and blue shirt under a cashmere jumper. Not too dressy, but neat and respectable. Elsa always said that blue suited me. Entering the restaurant, I nodded to the hostess, Sarah, who upon seeing me widened her eyes slightly, but quickly regained her composure. "Good evening, sir. Are you expecting a reservation?" "Yes, a table for Hutch or Prescott," I replied, playing the part of a regular customer. "Of course, sir. Your party is already here. Let me show you to your table." I followed Sarah through the hall, filled with hushed conversations and the clinking of glasses. I knew every corner of this place, every detail of the interior, from the oak paneling on the walls to the row-iron lamps I had commissioned from a local craftsman. I saw some of the patrons look up as I passed by. Many of them were regulars and recognized me, but today I didn't stop for greetings and small talk as usually did. I saw them from a distance. Null Verity and her parents were sitting at the best table by the window. Hugh Prescott was talking animatedly, gesturing with his hands. Winifred was smiling indulgently. Verity was scanning the room with the expert eye of someone assessing merchandise. And Null. Null looked so strange in his expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair. When had he become this smooth young man, so unlike the boy Elsa and I had raised? "Dad?" He spotted me first and stood up to greet me. We were starting to worry. "Sorry I'm late." I shook his hand and nodded to the others. A few things came up. Verity looked me up and down, lingering on my sweater, which was clearly not new, though it was of good quality. The corners of her lips twitched in a barely perceptible smile. "Barton, we're so glad you could join us," she said in a tone that didn't match her words at all. "I hope you like it here. It's not the home cooking you're used to, but I'm told it's quite decent." "I'm sure it'll be fine," I replied, sitting down in the empty chair between Null and Hugh. "Barton, long time no see?" Hugh slapped me on the shoulder with exaggerated familiarity. "How have you been? Still working at that little restaurant?" "Yes, still, in the restaurant business." I smiled, not correcting his deliberately derogatory little restaurant. Commendable, commendable. He nodded. These days, few people stay loyal to their work for so long. Although, of course, you could take some time off when you retire. I'm not retired, Hugh, and I don't plan to be anytime soon. Of course, a man should work as long as he can. And when he can't anymore, well, there's always family to fall back on. He looked meaningfully at Null, and I understood what he was saying. In their minds, I was an aging father who would soon become a burden to his successful son. I should have laughed, but I held back. The waiter approached Michael, one of our best employees, who had been working at the Old Maple for 8 years. I saw him hesitate for a moment when he saw me as a customer, but he quickly regained his composure. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael, and I will be your server tonight. Would you like an aperitif before dinner?" Verity, of course, took the initiative. "We'll have champagne. Do you have Dom Perignon?" "Of course, ma'am. Which vintage would you prefer?" 2010 if you have it." Certainly. When Michael had left, Verity turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I hope you don't mind champagne, Barton. After all, we're celebrating. 2 years of marriage is worth marking. Of course, I nodded. Congratulations to you both. Winterfred, who had been silent until now, leaned across the table toward me. Barton, I must say, this place is much better than I expected. Such a cozy atmosphere, almost like a country club, only more accessible. Yes, it's nice here, I agreed, enjoying the irony of the situation. A good place for special occasions. Oh, we usually prefer more sophisticated restaurants, Verity interjected. But my friend raved about this place, so I decided to give it a try. Although I must admit, I'm a little concerned that they still use cotton tablecloths instead of linen. Decent establishments only use linen these days. I suppressed a smile. The tablecloths at the Old Maple were made of the highest quality Egyptian cotton, specially ordered from a supplier I had been working with for 15 years, but Verity, of course, was above such details. Michael returned with champagne and a basket of freshly baked bread. Hedifley opened the bottle, filled our glasses, and left, promising to return in a few minutes to take our order. Hugh raised his glass. To Null and Verity, to their love and success. We clinked ked glasses, and I noticed Verity cast an appraising glance at my sweater as I raised my arm. Her disdain was almost palpable. Barton, she began after her first sip, I've been meaning to ask you your sweater. Is that a vintage style? Nowadays, you know, a lot of young people wear old clothes on purpose. It's considered trendy. No, Verity. It's just a comfortable sweater, I replied calmly. I don't really follow trends. Yes, that's obvious. She smiled as if she had paid me a compliment. At your age, it must be difficult to keep up with fashion. And why bother, really, when you work? In a restaurant, appearance isn't that important. Appearance is always important, dear, Wyfred interjected. It's just that everyone has different opportunities. Barton must spend his money on more practical things than clothes. That's admirable. They were talking about me as if I weren't at the table. I noticed Noel shifting uncomfortably in his chair, clearly feeling awkward, but saying nothing in my defense. Michael returned to take our dinner order. Verity naturally took on the role of expert, asking detailed questions about each dish and commenting on how it should be prepared in really good restaurants. When it was my turn, I simply said, "Sirloin steak with blueberry sauce, medium rare. Excellent choice, sir." Michael nodded with a slight smile. When he walked away, Verity turned to me. You know, Barton, blueberry sauce is a rather difficult combination with steak. Beef is usually served with pepper or mushroom sauce, but of course, everyone has their own taste. I have a special relationship with blueberry sauce, I replied. And it was the absolute truth. Elsa and I had developed the recipe together, spending long evenings experimenting in our small kitchen. A special relationship with sauce? Verity laughed, and her parents joined her. How funny you are, Barton. Always so unique. Dinner continued in the same vein. Verity and her parents discussed their travels, their high society acquaintances, and the latest trends in interior design. Null occasionally chimed in, trying to show that he too belonged to this world. I mostly kept quiet, watching the spectacle and thinking about what Elsa would have said if she were here. When our dishes were served, Verity didn't miss the opportunity to make another remark. Oh, your steak looks interesting, Barton. That's a big portion. Enough for 2, isn't it? But I suppose when you're doing physical work, you need more calories. Verity, Null finally spoke up. Would you mind? Mind what, dear? She smiled innocently. I'm just concerned about your father's health. At his age, he needs to watch what he eats. I calmly cut into my steak. It was cooked to perfection, just as I had expected. The blueberry sauce, glossy and fragrant, complemented the flavor of the meat just as it should. You know, Barton, Verity continued after a few minutes of silence, I've always admired people who devote their entire lives to one thing. It's such stability. Although, of course, in today's world it's important to develop and move forward, but not everyone can afford to do that. Afford? I asked, looking up from my plate. Yes, education, new skills. All of that costs money and time, of course, but mostly money which many people simply don't have. Verity, please. Noel tried to intervene again, but she ignored him. No, it's fine, she said, placing her hand on his wrist. Your father understands what I mean, right, Barton? You never had the opportunity, well, to move up, but there's no shame in that. Someone has to do that kind of work. Hugh grunted in agreement, and Winterfred gave me a condescending smile. Waiters are the backbone of the restaurant business, she added as if to compliment me. Without them, even the best chefs wouldn't be able to bring their art to the public. I took a sip of wine, feeling not anger, but a strange amusement growing inside me. The situation was so absurd that I could barely contain my laughter. You're right, Wilfred, I said finally. Every person in a restaurant is important, from the dishwasher to the owner. Oh, the owners, Verity dismissed. They are usually just investors who never even show up. The real work falls on the shoulders of the staff. People like you, Barton. At that moment, Michael approached our table with a bottle of wine. Excuse me for interrupting, he said, addressing me. Mr. Hutch, Jeffrey asked if you would be at the meeting with the new supplier tomorrow. He tried to call you, but you didn't answer. There was a moment of silence. Verity froze with her fork in midair. Hugh frowned, and Wilfred blinked in confusion, looking from me to the waiter and back. Yes, Michael, I will, I replied calmly. Tell Jeffrey, I'll be there by 9. All right, sir. And the chef asks if you enjoyed your steak. Used a new method of aging the meat that you mentioned last week. Tell him the steak was excellent. The aging had exactly the effect we were hoping for. Very well, sir. Enjoy your meal. Michael left, and a heavy silence fell over the table. I continued to eat calmly, feeling the astonished glances of everyone present. Dad, Noel finally said, his voice sounding strangely high. You know the staff at this restaurant? I put down my fork and knife, dabbed my lips with a napkin, and looked at my son. Yes, Noel. I know the staff quite well, considering that I own this restaurant, and 6 more just like it in different cities. Verity made a strange sound, something between a cough and a wheeze. Her perfectly made-up face turned to ashen. You own it? Noel repeated as if he didn't understand the meaning of the word. Yes, son. The Old Maple is a chain of restaurants I founded 32 years ago. We started out with a small place with 5 tables, and now we have 7 restaurants in different cities, 3 stars in the Michelin Guide, and several $1 million in revenue annually. And next month, we're opening our 8th restaurant in New York. Hugh Prescott coughed, choking on his wine. Winterfred patted him busily on the back, but kept her astonished eyes on me. But you never said, Noel muttered. You never asked, I replied simply. You always knew I worked in the restaurant business, but you weren't interested in the details. Even when you were little and I took you into the kitchen, you always wanted to leave. And then you found your own path, and I respected your choice. Verity finally found her voice. You've been pretending a poor retiree all this time. I looked her straight in the eyes. I never pretended, Verity. I just didn't see the need to brag about my accomplishments. My father always said, let your actions speak for you, not your wallet. I live modestly, not because I can't afford more, but because it's comfortable for me. And I never judge people by how much money they spend on clothes or what kind of watch they wear. Hugh Prescott cleared his throat and suddenly burst into natural laughter. Barton, old man, what a surprise. Who would have thought? Why did you keep quiet all this time? We could have discussed investments, the real estate market. Because to you, Hugh, a man who works in a restaurant wasn't worth a serious conversation, I replied calmly. Only now, when you found out that I'm the owner and not a waiter. Are you suddenly interested in my opinion? But I'm the same person I was 5 minutes ago. Wilfred nervously adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. Barton, dear, you've misunderstood us. We've always held you in the highest regard. It's just that you've been so modest, so reluctant to talk about your achievements. You called me a pauper at this very table. I turned to Verity. Not 10 minutes ago, you implied that I couldn't afford decent clothes or an education. You looked down on me from the day we met. Even though you knew nothing about me, Verity pedaled even more, her lips trembling. I never called you. You did, Verity. Null interrupted unexpectedly, his voice sounding tired. You did it all the time. And I let you. Even though I knew deep down, I always knew that my father didn't just work in a restaurant. I grew up watching him run this place, making decisions, seeing how the staff treated him with respect. But it was convenient to forget that. It was convenient to let you think he was just an old man working as a waiter or a cook because it made me feel better. More successful. Verity turned to him, her face contorted with rage. You knew? You knew all this time and you didn't say anything? I didn't know for sure. Null shook his head. I just suspected, but I never asked, because it was easier for me to live in a world where I was the successful son-in-law of Hugh Prescott, not the son of Barton Hutch, who turned his back on the family business. I looked at my son, and for the first time in a long time saw a glimpse of the boy Elsa and I had raised. A boy who wasn't afraid to tell the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. Well, I said, finishing my wine, the masks are off. Now you know who I am. And I finally see who you are. I looked at Verity. You know what's always amazed me? How people who consider themselves elite are often so much more petty and superficial than those they despise. You look at a person and you see their clothes, their car, their address. You don't see their character, their soul, their values. Verity opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand to stop her. You thought you humiliated me with your mockery, but in reality, you only humiliated yourselves, because real wealth isn't a bank account or designer clothes. It's the ability to see value in people regardless of their status. That's what my parents taught me, and that's what I tried to teach Null. It's a shame the lesson wasn't learned. I stood up from the table, placing my napkin next to my plate. The restaurant is on the house. Good night. I left the restaurant on a cool autumn evening, breathing in the fresh air deeply. The moon hung over the city, surrounded by a scattering of stars. And for a moment, it seemed to me that Elsa was looking down at me from above. Would you approve? I asked her silently, and I thought I heard her quiet laugh. It's about time, Bart. It's about time. The restaurant door slammed behind me and I turned around. Null ran out after me, his face pale, his tie askew. Dad, wait. I stopped at my car and watched him hurry toward me. At that moment, he looked so young, almost like the boy who once asked me to check if there were monsters under his bed. I don't know what to say, he breathed, stopping in front of me. Then maybe it's better to say nothing, I replied calmly. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. No, I have to. Dad, I'm sorry. I acted like a man who is ashamed of his father. I finished for him. Like a man who allows his wife to mock the person who gave him life. He lowered his eyes and I saw his shoulders slump. Yes, that's exactly how I acted. I don't know how it happened. How I became this. I looked at my son, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and pity. He really didn't understand how he had gradually become who he was. It happens little by little, day after day, I said quietly. Every time you choose the easy way instead of the right way. Every time you stay silent when you should speak up. Every time you let others define who you are. What should I do, Dad? His voice sounded almost childishly confused. That's up to you, Noel. I can't tell you how to live your life. I tried to do that when you were younger, and look where that got us. Here we are, outside a restaurant trying to figure out how it all went wrong. The restaurant door opened again, and Verity and her parents stepped outside. They stopped on the sidewalk when they saw us, and the tension hung heavy in the air. Verity looked furious, her usually flawless makeup smudged as if she had been crying or rubbing her eyes. Hugh and Whifford stood slightly behind her, their faces a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. "No." Verity's voice rang with tension. "We're leaving right now." My son turned to her but didn't move. "Verity, wait. I'm talking to my father. What is there to talk about?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the asphalt like miniature hammers, about how he's been lying to us all this time. Made us think he was some poor old man when in reality I never lied to anyone. I interrupted her. "I always told you the truth about what I do. If you chose to draw your own conclusions based on your prejudices, that's not my fault." "Prejudices?" Her eyes widened in indignation. "You wear cheap clothes, live in an ordinary house, drive an old car?" "Of course," we thought. "You thought that a person is defined by what they wear and where they live." I finished for her. "And that's the problem. Verity. You only see the surface, only the outside." Hugh Prescott cleared his throat and stepped forward, putting on his most charming smile. "Barton, listen. There's clearly been a misunderstanding here. Noon meant to offend you. Verity can be blunt at times, but she's a good person. We're all family here, and I'm sure we can work this misunderstanding out like adults." I looked at him, trying to figure out if he really believed what he was saying, or if this was just another attempt at manipulation. "Misunderstanding, Hugh? Your daughter called me a beggar. That's a misunderstanding." "Well, she was emotional." No young people say things without thinking these days." "Dad," Verity protested, but Hugh gestured for her to be quiet. "Barton, let's start over. Now that we know about your successful business, I think we have something to talk about, perhaps over a glass of fine brandy. I have an excellent Remy Martin XO at home." I couldn't help but laugh. It was so predictable, so transparent, it was almost comical. "Hugh, you never cease to amaze me. Half an hour ago you were looking down on me as if I were unworthy of your attention. And now, having learned about my financial situation, you suddenly want to be best friends. Don't you find that a little hypocritical?" Hugh's face wrined, but he quickly regained his composure. "That's not fair, Barton. I've always treated you with respect. It's just that we're from different worlds, and I thought you thought I was lower than you on the social ladder." I finished for him, and therefore not worthy of real respect. Wayfred, who had been silent until now, took a step forward, her pearl necklace glistening dimly in the light of the street lamps. "Barton, please don't be so harsh. We all make mistakes. No one is perfect. Hugh and I would love to get to know you better, learn about your business. Maybe we could even help you with some connections in high society." "High society?" I shook my head. "Winifred. I know the governor of the state, 3 senators, and some of the biggest businessmen in the country. They all eat at my restaurants. Some of them are my friends. I don't need your connections." She looked as if I had slapped her. Hugh put his hand on her shoulder, his face hardening. "All right, Barton. I see you're not interested in reconciliation. That's your right. But think about Noel and Verity. They're young. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Don't destroy their family because of your pride." Verity, who until that moment had been glaring at me furiously, suddenly changed tactics. Her face softened, her eyes filled with tears. "Barton," she said, taking a step toward me. "I need to apologize. I was wrong. I said some terrible things, and I have no excuse. But I was blinded by my prejudices, my upbringing. Now I see what an amazing person you are. Building a business from scratch, achieving such success. It's inspiring." I looked at her, trying to see a shred of sincerity in her words. But all I saw was calculation. She was already figuring out how to turn the situation to her advantage, how to use my newfound wealth. "Verity," I said calmly, "you don't admire me. You admire my money, and that's a big difference." Her face twisted with anger for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. No, you're wrong. I admire your strength, your modesty, your verity. I raise my hand, stopping the flow of flattery. Let's not do this. We both know it's not true. You despised me when you thought I was poor. Now that you know I'm not, you're trying to change your attitude. But I'm still the same person. And if you couldn't respect me then, I don't believe you truly respect me now. Noel, who had been insolently shifting his gaze between me and his wife, finally spoke up. Verity, enough. Dad's right. You despised him. We both know that. She turned sharply toward him, her eyes narrowing. Whose side are you on, Noel? Is he more important to you than me? Than our family? It's not about sides, Verity. It's about the truth. We were wrong. Both of us. I let you say terrible things about my father, and I often thought, no better. I'm ashamed of that. Verity's face contorted with rage. How dare you, after everything my family has done for you? What would you be without us, without my father's connections? Just another loser jumping from job to job? Noel flinched as if he had been struck. But he didn't back down. Maybe, but at least I would have been honest with myself. Hugh stepped forward, his face anxious. Okay, let's all calm down. We're all tired and upset. Let's go home, get some sleep, and discuss everything tomorrow with a clear head. I'm sure we can find a solution that will work for everyone. I looked at him, at his wife, at Verity, at my son, and suddenly felt deeply exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. It was as if the burden I had been carrying all these years had suddenly become unbearably heavy. Hugh, there is no solution that will satisfy everyone, I said quietly. Because we want different things. You want to use my money and connections. Verity wants to control Noel and through him access to my fortune, and I just want to be myself without pretense or manipulation. That's not fair, Barton, Hugh began, but I shook my head. It's perfectly fair and you know it. But you know what? I'm grateful for tonight. It's helped me see the truth that I may have ignored for too long. I turned to Noel, who stood with his shoulders slumped, lost between two worlds. Son, you need to decide who you are and what you want out of life. Not what Verity wants or I want or anyone else wants. What you want. And when you decide, I'll be here. Whatever choice you make. I got into the car and started the engine. Through the window, I could see Verity saying something fiercely to Nell, Hugh, and Wyfred standing nearby, their faces a mixture of confusion and calculation. And I saw my son, a lonely figure between them, Amon at a crossroads. I pulled out of the parking lot feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I had been completely honest with them and with myself. And whatever the consequences, I was ready to accept them. I spent the next morning in my office above the restaurant, reviewing reports and preparing for a meeting with a new supplier. Work had always been my refuge, a place where I felt confident and calm. But today, my thoughts kept returning to the events of the previous evening, to Noel's expression as he stood in the parking lot, torn between loyalty to his father and fear of losing his wife's affection. Around 11:00, there was a knock at my office door. Come in, I said, expecting to see Jeffrey or one of the staff. But standing in the doorway was Hugh Prescott, impeccably dressed with a briefcase in his hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Barton, good morning. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I leaned back in my chair, surprised, but not shocked by his appearance. Hugh, to what do I owe the pleasure of such an early visit? He entered the office, looking around with ill-concealed curiosity. My office was simple and functional. A desk, a few chairs, bookshelves filled with cookbooks and business literature, and a few photographs on the walls. I thought we should talk in private, man-to-man without emotional women and children. Have a seat, I said, pointing to the chair across from me. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. I won't be long. He sat down, placing his briefcase on his knees, and was silent for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. Barton, I came towel to apologize for yesterday. The situation got out of hand, and I regret it. Do you regret the situation or the way you behaved? I asked bluntly. He frowned slightly, but quickly regained his impeccable smile. Both, of course. I shouldn't have judged you by your appearance. That was wrong. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Hugh Prescott wasn't the kind of man who came just to apologize. And I thought, he continued, opening his briefcase, that maybe we could, fix this situation. Get back on track. He took out a folder of documents and placed it on the table in front of me. What's this? I asked, not touching the folder. A business proposal. You see, Barton, I've been thinking about diversifying my investments for some time. Real estate is all well and good, but the restaurant business, especially one as successful as yours, is an interesting opportunity. I looked at him, not believing my ears. After everything that had happened yesterday, he came here with a business proposal. You want to invest in my restaurants? I clarified. Not exactly. He smiled even wider. I'm thinking of a more comprehensive collaboration, a partnership, if you will. My company could acquire a controlling stake in your chain, and you would remain as managing director. We would provide capital for expansion, take the brand national. Imagine Old Maple in every major city in America. I slowly opened the folder. Inside was a contract, several pages of figures, graphs, and forecasts. I glanced through the documents, noting the key points. You're offering me to sell a controlling stake in my company for this amount. I pointed to the figure in the contract. Yes, and I consider it a very generous offer. Given the current market situation and your annual turnover, the multiplier is more than fair. I closed the folder and looked at Hugh Prescott. He sat with his back straight with the confident and slightly condescending expression of a man accustomed to getting what he wants. Hugh, let me ask you a question, I said calmly. Why do you think I would agree to sell my life's work to a man who yesterday looked at me like I was dirt beneath his feet? His smile faltered but did not disappear. Barton, I've already apologized for that misunderstanding, and I came here with a business proposal that has nothing to do with our personal relationship. This is purely business. There's nothing pure about business, Hugh. Business is built on trust, on relationships, on honesty, and I don't see any of that in you. He tensed, his eyes turning cold. That's a very emotional approach to business, Barton. No wonder your chain is still limited to a few restaurants, even though the potential is much greater. Maybe, I shrugged, but these are my restaurants, my vision. My soul is in every dish, in every detail of the interior, and I'm not going to sell that for any amount of money, especially not to you. Hugh pressed his lips into a thin line, his feigned friendliness gone. You're making a mistake, Barton. Business doesn't tolerate sentimentality. Sooner or later, you'll have to learn that. Perhaps, but it will be my mistake, not yours. He stood up, nodded curtly, and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold. Think about it, Barton. Offers like this don't come around twice. After he left, I sat for a long time staring at the closed door. Then I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. Mark, it's Barton Hutch. We need to meet today if possible. I want to make some changes to my will. The rest of the day was spent taking care of things related to their restaurant. I checked the kitchen, talked to suppliers, and met with the chef to discuss seasonal changes to the menu. Work was always the best cure for all problems. Around 6 in the evening, just as E was about to leave, there was another knock on my office door. Come in, I said, expecting to see Jeffrey with thelitis reports. But standing in the doorway was Verity, impeccably dressed with perfect makeup, but with a hint of uncertainty in her eyes that I had never seen before. Barton, may I come in? She asked, her voice not as confident as usual. Of course, I nodded to the chair where her father had been sitting a few hours earlier. Have a seat. She entered, sat down cautiously, placing her designer handbag on her lap. She was silent for a moment, as if unsure of how to begin. Noel doesn't know I'm here, she said finally. He's very upset. After yesterday, we're both upset. He nodded, waiting for her to continue. Barton, I came here to try to fix things. I know I behaved inappropriately. I said some terrible things, and I sincerely regret it. I looked at her closely, trying to see the real Verity behind the perfect mask. Was she being sincere? Or was this just another mask, another role? Verity, why are you really here? She asked bluntly. What do you want? She sighed, and for a moment, I thought I saw the real woman behind the facade. I want everything to be okay. I don't want Noel to be torn between us. I want us to be a family. A family? I raised an eyebrow. You never saw me as family, Verity. To you, I was always an obstacle, an inconvenient appendage to Noel. She lowered her eyes. I know, and I was wrong. I placed too much importance on external things. Money, status. I thought that's what made a person significant, and now you think differently. She looked up, and I could see the struggle in her eyes between pride and the need to accept between her true feelings and what she had to say to get what she wanted. I'm learning to see things differently, she said cautiously. And I'd like you to give me a chance to prove it, a chance to be better. I looked at her for a long time, trying to decide what to believe. Part of me wanted to believe in her sincerity, in the possibility of change. Another, more cynical part saw it as just another attempt at manipulation. Verity, I'll give you a chance. Not for your sake, but for Noel's. But remember, words are meaningless without action. I'll judge you not by what you say, but by what you do. She nodded, her face showing relief. Thank you, Barton. I won't let you down. We could start with a family dinner this weekend at our place. Just the three of us without my parents. Okay? I agreed, even though a voice inside me warned me that this might be a trap. I'll be there. When she left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking down at the street below. People hurried about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding around them. I thought about No, about Verity, about Hugh and Whifford Prescott, about how money and status can distort human relationships, turn love into a transaction and family into a business partnership. And I thought about the decision I had made today in my lawyer's office, a decision that would change the future of my family and my business forever. The office of Mark Livingston, my lawyer and old friend, was quiet and cool. Outside, a light autumn rain was falling, the drops running down the glass and creating intricate patterns. Mark sat across from me, reviewing the documents I had just signed, his face focused and slightly concerned. Are you sure, Bart? He asked, looking up from the papers. These are serious changes. Noel is your only son, your flesh and blood. I looked at my signature, smooth and clear, which had just changed the course of my life and the lives of my family. I'm sure, Mark. Blood isn't the only thing that binds people together. Sometimes it's not even the most important thing. Mark sighed, gathering the documents into a neat stack. I've known your boy since he was a child. I remember him running around your first restaurant while you were in the kitchen. Is it really that bad? I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. It's not that it's bad, Mark. It's just that Nola's made his choice. He has chosen the world of the press gods, a world of ostentatious luxury, social status, and empty values. And I have to respect his choice, even if I don't agree with it. And now what? The foundation you're setting up, that's a big responsibility, I know, but it's the right thing to do. Money should be put to work helping those who really need it. Young people who, like me once, dream of starting their own business, but have neither themins nor the connections. Mark nodded, putting the documents away in a folder. Your wife would be proud of you, Bart. I smiled, remembering Elsa, her eyes, her smile, her ability to see the best in people. I hope so, Mark. I really do. On my way home, I stopped by the cemetery. The rain had stopped and the air was fresh, filled with the smell of wet earth and fallen leaves. I walked down the familiar path to Elsa's grave, holding a bouquet of her favorite wildflowers. Hi, Elle, I said quietly, placing the flowers on the gravestone. I did it. I changed the will. Now the bulk of our estate will go to a fund to help young entrepreneurs. I think you would have liked that. I stood there for a while, letting the memories flow through me. Our first meeting, our wedding, Noel's birth, the opening of our first restaurant, all the joys and sorrows we shared. I miss you, Elle. But today, I feel like you're somewhere close by, watching over me. The wind brushed my face like the gentle touch of a loved one's hand, and for a moment I felt her presence as clearly as if she were standing right there. Saturday. Evening came too quickly. I stood in front of Noel and Verity's house, gathering my courage before ringing the doorbell. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away to avoid what was sure to be an unpleasant conversation, but I had never been a man who ran away from challenges. Noel opened the door, his face a mixture of hope and anxiety. Dad, you came, he said as if he wasn't sure I would actually show up. I promised, I replied simply. He stepped aside to let me in. Inside, everything was immaculate as always. Perfectly arranged designer furniture, works of art on the walls, not a speck of dust, not a single item out of place. The house was like something out of a magazine, but not a place to live. Verity emerged from the kitchen wearing a simple but elegant dress, with a smile that seemed almost genuine. Barton, we're so glad you came, she said, coming closer. I made dinner myself. Nothing fancy, just home cooking. I struggled to hide my surprise. Verity cooking a home-cooked meal. This was something new. That sounds wonderful, I replied politely. We walked into the dining room where the table was set for 3. No frills, no ostentatious details, just a normal family setting. I noticed that even the wine glasses were not the crystal works of art they usually used, but simple yet elegant flutes. Sit down, Dad, Noel said, pointing to the head of the table. I'll open the wine. Verity returned with a dish of roast beef, which, to her credit, looked delicious. The smell of beef stewed with vegetables and herbs filled the room. I hope you like it, Barton. I found the recipe online. I was looking for something authentic, not one of those trendy diet dishes that don't fill you up. I nodded, noting her attempt to please me, to show that she was changing. Noel poured the wine, inexpensive but good, a red that went perfectly with their stew. To the family, he said, raising his glass. To a new beginning. We drank and ate in silence for a while, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. The roast was not bad, maybe not as good as